So, good evening and welcome to the Dusty Feet. And if you're watching this on a rerun, you're watching this again, then you're not going to get this line, but welcome to part two of part two. So, we went to go live and it's our own issue. So, welcome to the Dusty Feet. We're going to have fun tonight. I said it before, I'm going to say it again. Tonight, uh, outside the class, that's the new branding we're going to do for the homework series. And remember, we're eventually going to get to posting these instead of live. So the links will be in the description for everything, and the clips will just be talking heads, but we'll keep them shorter. We'll have some fun with those. With that, as we are going to see the new graphics we're going with and all that kind of stuff, so it'll be fun. As a surprise, we have a special guest in the house tonight. Jim Wern's in the house, so we'll have some fun chatting with him about part two of this Mackie setup. So I think we'll enjoy ourselves. Oh, and by the way, it is the end of September already. We're ready to approach the last quarter of 2022. Crazy, isn't it? That's crazy, crazy. So don't forget, in the description below will be links to all of the audio, video, and source documents that we use here on the Dusty Feet. We want to make sure that any material we use here is properly credited to those folks who work so hard to bring it to us. Without their efforts, learning we do here does not happen. So please be sure to click to subscribe, hit the bell icon for any reminders, and you can always go to thedustyfeet.com. And as always on the Dusty Feet, this is a place we can safely explore the endless ways of God, interconnection of His creation, where belief understandings may be challenged, divine misunderstandings may exist, and traditional teachings might falter as we pursue connection, context, and community with God and each other here in an environment of grace and love. So here we go with Outside the Class on the Dusty Feet. So we get to do our usual with this. You're going to watch a clip from Mackie. Again, this is part two in this video. We're roughly, I think, from the 13 going on 14th minute to the 24th minute ballpark, I think, what we're doing in this video. So enjoy it. And then afterwards, Jim and I will be back. You'll see two heads, and we'll have a nice chat. Looking forward to it. Enjoy Mackie.
And what sets them apart? What sets the positive responses apart from the negative responses? And go back and look at the story about the blind men. After they call on Jesus as the Son of David, Jesus proceeds to have a conversation with them, a little lecture. Jesus is prone to this. Do you notice? It's like these really intense moments and everything's like, whoa. And then Jesus stops and like, hey, let's have a little talk. You know? And then he talks about it. And what do they end up talking about? Faith. Faith. Jesus says, do you believe that I am able to do this? Yeah, that's why we're here. They replied. And so he touched their eyes and says, according to your faith. Faith. So right at the center of these three really different responses is this conversation and teaching of Jesus about faith. So what is it that makes people respond in these different ways, or what separates these responses apart? And it's faith. And this is not the first time we've seen faith come up in these stories, is it? Again, if you've been following the last 9 Sundays, there was the story about the Roman soldier and his faith. There was the story about the lack of faith of the disciples in the boat in the storm and that whole thing. There was the story of the faith of the paralyzed man and his friends, the faith of the woman who had the bleeding. That was last Sunday. Right? Faith is a big theme in these stories. So it's like you have the Jesus stained glass window, and all these stories are giving us new insights into Jesus. And then you also, from these stories, have a faith stained glass window. And we've been getting this really robust definition of what faith in Jesus looks like. And so here's another story that's going to help us see another angle on what it means to have faith. So before we say what faith is, as if we think we already know, let's let's let the story define what faith is not. Whatever faith is, it marks these blind men, and I think the crowds also in a certain way, but it's clearly not what the Pharisees have going on. So what is faith not, for sure? It's not having a closed mind. See, the Pharisees have already made up their minds about who God is, what the world is like, and Jesus doesn't fit. So they place Jesus in a box about a conclusion that they've already drawn because they already know who Jesus is and what he's about. He must be evil. Do you see that? It's a closed mind. So whatever faith is in this story, it's the opposite of thinking that you already know everything that you need to know. Which means that faith in this story, it's beautiful. And it's not something we would normally think of as a part of faith. Faith is about openness. One aspect of faith is that it's a commitment to be open to Jesus, but just open in general, right? Like just openness to new ideas, to new ways of thinking about myself and thinking about who God is and about other people. It's a commitment to open-mindedness. Now, I'm pretty sure that none of us saw that coming, right, in a way. But really think about that. To trust someone, that's what faith is. If you're trusting someone in any relationship, you're opening yourself. You're making yourself vulnerable to someone when you really trust in them and begin relying on them and bank on them. You're opening yourself. And what you're doing is you're refusing to make a conclusion that you already know who this person is and what they're all about. And you say, well, actually, probably I don't know everything about this person and what they're all about, and so I'm going to open myself. I'm going to open, like maybe this person has new things to add to my life, and they have new things to say that I've never heard before. That's faith, right? And that's what I think the crowds have going on, and that's what these blind men have going on. They hear about Jesus. Who knows what they heard? They heard some reports. Should we believe them? Oh, he's been healing other people. Maybe he could hear us. No way. Is that possible? No, that's never happened in the history of Israel. There's never been blind people healed in the history of Israel, but somehow they've got it in their minds that maybe the world is the kind of place where this Jesus could heal and transform me. That's a very hopeful, open-minded view of the world and of God, isn't it? It's a view of the world that there's possibilities. Because of Jesus, there's possibilities in the world that I haven't even imagined before. That's faith in these stories. It's the opposite of closed-mindedness. It's open-mindedness. Through Jesus, whole new possibilities open up. And it's a commitment to hold that trust in Jesus. You guys with me here? It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And so let me just pause real quick here. And this happens to me sometimes, and I try to pay attention to it. I'm not the most observant person in the world, so I probably miss all kinds of cues. But over the last few months, I've had almost the same exact conversation with about half a dozen different people here around Door of Hope. And when I see that, I try and pay attention to it, because I think there's something that Jesus wants me to see in that. And so it's been a conversation with people around Door of Hope who are newer Christians. They're new to following Jesus in the last year or two. And so that's always very interesting to me, and I'm stoked that there's so many people like that around Door of Hope. And so I always want to hear people's stories and how did that happen and what's it been like. And a focus point in many conversations has been about what this person's friends or family think about their decision to follow Jesus. And they're all negative, like really negative. Sometimes it's funny, like the crazy things that people's family members think that they're signing up for, right? And especially Door of Hope, because we're not a part of a big denomination or something like that. They're like, what is this Door of Hope? And what is this church? Like, they think we drink magic Kool-Aid or something together, and we're all going to move to Eastern Oregon or something and buy property together. Like, that's people's perception. That's the perception of these friends and family members that I was talking to. Like, why would you join something like that? Why would you follow something like Jesus? And what it brought up for me, a memory really that I had forgotten, but a significant one for me. When I was 20 and I decided to follow Jesus, and it was all new and fresh to me, and the Bible was all new. And I remember I was just reconnecting with a family friend. It was a neighbor that had lived on our street over on 22nd and Hawthorne when I was growing up. And it's a really cool lady, and we would watch her daughter and so on, and we became friends growing up. And so I was reconnecting with her, and I remember telling her about this whole new thing going on in my life, and Jesus, and following Jesus, and how amazing it was. And I remember she started crying. We were having dinner, right, with some friends, and she started crying. And she was sad. And she was like, I'm happy for you, but I'm grieved that you would choose to adopt such a closed-minded view of the world. We had a history of being honest with each other, right? But I remember she told me that, like, why would you choose to adopt such a narrow, closed view of the world? And I actually don't remember how that conversation ended, but that moment stuck. That was a while ago. But that moment stuck for me, and especially because, I'm not sure what to say, except this. My experience of following Jesus has been exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite. It's been through following Jesus that my mind has opened. Really. Quite literally, right? I was a horrible student, and I swear Jesus turned my brain on, right? But I became a Christian. I actually started reading books, something I really had never done before. And quite literally my mind opened, but really, if you really are looking at who Jesus is and you're listening to his teachings, your mind can't remain closed. You can't be a closed-minded person and follow Jesus. I'm convinced of it. Because you'll miss everything that he's trying to say and do to you, right? And it's actually through following Jesus that my mind has opened to other people, to relationships, and to history, and to nature. It's actually through Jesus that my eyes have opened to the world. My experience has been like the blind man. And so it's both, it requires an open mind to follow Jesus, because you just have to open yourself to him in the first place, and that this world is the kind of place where a dead, executed man can conquer death and rise from the dead. That's a whopper, right? So you have to, right? You have to deal with that one. Whoa, I didn't know the world was like that, and now I have to make room for that in my view of the world. And then the implications of that he's still alive, and that his presence is real in the community, and that the scriptures bear witness to him, and so on. You guys with me here? It requires an open mind to hear some new ideas and some new things. And then to actually follow Jesus in his teachings and his vision of what it means to be a human being and have your life restored by him, that also requires a very open mind, because it means you can't assume that you already know what it means to be a human being. What does it even mean to be a normal human being? You have to allow Jesus to redefine that, which requires an open mind. Because we have all these habits and patterns of how we live, and we think that's normal, and Jesus comes along and is like, no, that's really actually screwed up and destructive. Here's a new way to go. Like that, you guys with me here? Faith requires an open mind. And it's precisely when we assume that we already know how the world works and who God is and what humans are like and so on, that's exactly when we become like these religious leaders. We close our minds to Jesus.
We close our minds to Jesus. That's a scary thought, isn't it? So he gets it. So, and we have our names under the thing so that, because we're twins. So we have to make sure that you know who's who, guys. Just
I'm the one who came out second.
just so you know. Yeah, we're twins. We're like this. We're only 19 months apart. Ask my mom how long she had to have twins that far apart. Who knows? But there you go. So, we were joking that we had hit record on this. At least I thought I did. Bob hit the button. It's Bob's button. It's just own this. It's the
Push
show.
the button, Max.
And miss the dad. And then my dad sticks his head in the door and says, if we're 15 minutes in, we're just gabbing away. Mackie's playing. The dad says, you're not live. And I'm like, okay, Dad. Thanks for being our dad. Yep. There you go.
Watching out for us always.
There you go. Okay. So there's a lot going on here,
Mhm.
and where you can go with open-minded thought process. So what are some of the things that popped you at first, and then we can roll from there. Anything?
It's interesting because this wasn't about. It was kind of chewing on it a little bit the first time I listened to it, and then listening to it again here. Um, it's like this isn't about apologetics, but it is about apologetics in the sense that he wasn't creating. Mackie wasn't saying that there isn't a place where we need to understand how to be defenders of the faith and the truth of who God is and who Jesus is.
Mm-hmm.
He's talking about being open to change, open to transformation,
Mm-hmm.
and that's necessary for salvation because we have to obviously change our perspective from what we thought life was about to understanding what life really is about in terms of a relationship with Jesus.
Right.
But there's something about when it's like we get it when we become Christians because we go, oh yeah, I mean that did change my life. But then we get so rooted in the church, rooted in doctrine, that we forget that we have to have a open-mindedness about life in order for us to engage people with this transformational truth that we have. And that was connecting with me as he was talking.
There, it's interesting you mentioned apologetics, and I have a skewed view on that, like I do from other things. But because, for instance, we'll use Jesus as an example. He never had to defend anything with that. That this is not his point in his context, and sometimes I think people often get driven by the need to defend Jesus. I'm like, he didn't even defend himself, meaning that wasn't his purpose or focus in this.
Right.
And the scriptures that he's talking about, the defense isn't that needed. Now, we'll debate that when you hit us the Gentile side, because understand his audience and context are Jewish, okay, or Samaritan in nature. So there's already an understanding of what they already understand, right? And then the Gentile doesn't understand. The Gentile doesn't understand when he starts hearing about Jesus that it's only because of Torah and the prophets that Jesus is there, meaning that that's the connection we're getting here in this, and how we want to drive that. But when we get to this open-mindedness thought process is when we think we're so sure. I think that interesting because he mentioned something about the Pharisees, and first he mentions that they don't have faith.
Right.
Okay, and that's one of the few things that, and with Mackie, when I say exception to Mackie, because I've said it before, often it's not exception to Mackie in the way that it sounds. It's more a semantics or a word choice in that, in the baggage that could be associated with it. Because I think the Pharisees had faith, but we'll argue, because then he kind of hints at it later in the road, that they had a closed-minded faith, meaning they had already had determined something. They had a preconceived idea, and he didn't fit in their box.
Yeah.
They're from their expectation of everybody there, every person there in Jesus's, in Yeshua's audience, everyone, Samaritan included, all understood Messiah. All of them.
Okay.
This wasn't a unique thought. This wasn't deal. They're waiting for Messiah. However, at that point, they already have a preconceived idea about what Messiah is supposed to be. I had a clip. Maybe we'll play it at the end. Maybe depending on our timing. It's from the Chosen, and it's about a Samaritan, which is a killer scene, and it's great. But the wife brings up the point that, Messiah's here, and Messiah is supposed to, right? Because she's a preconceived idea of what Messiah is supposed to be, including that you're supposed to take away all the suppression and pain and all this kind of stuff. And Jesus gives his answer. So they have this preconceived idea, and from a Pharisaical standpoint, in that, again, it's not an all-inclusive box, because not all of the Pharisee thought that. Nicodemus,
Mhm.
in an episode ago, we were talking about the religious leader from one of the neighboring villages in Capernaum came to Jesus about healing his daughter. So we know that it's not all religious leaders, but the predominant leadership that we keep running into is the Pharisaical box there. And they already have this box of what Messiah is supposed to look like, and he fits in this box. And it wasn't working. And they would have to admit that they didn't have the box right. And rather than say, let's listen to him, they fought. The other people, not so much. But they're preconceived. And because of that, it stopped the personal interaction. In other words, that's part of the point, yeah? That they missed the opportunity in that to they became so close-minded in their faith that they lost the opportunity to make this connection that he was trying to make with the people and his disciples early, because he tried to get them on board because they needed to learn just as much as people did. So
It's interesting. I was talking with a friend of mine today, and he used the term bounded belief or bounded faith. I think he might have said too.
bounded, as in
Bounded.
bound. Okay.
Boundaries, as in boundaries.
Okay.
As
Okay.
in what the Pharisees did.
Right.
Here is their definition. Boom,
Yeah.
boom. If you
Yeah.
don't fit in here, then you're outside.
Okay.
You're not accepted.
Mhm.
When you think from a bounded perspective, it by nature, I mean, some people like the boundaries because it's easy to live within.
There's a comfort. There is. Yeah.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
There is. I'll bite.
mhm,
Yeah. It just tell
definitely.
me what to do, either to do something good, meaning tell me what
Mhm,
to do, or tell me what not to do, so that I
right,
don't bear the consequence. And that's what a lot of the Jewish practices are, merely that.
right.
They're merely because to do something that they say God says do this, so let's do
Mhm,
it, and this is how we think we should do it now,
right.
or how not to do something so that they don't,
Yeah.
or God says it happens when you don't, and they don't want to do
Mhm,
that. So yeah, so I get it.
mhm.
And we think that Christians don't do that either. I'm like, yeah, yeah, yeah. We have
Well,
our own.
and it's funny because okay, I'm going to I'm going to be vulnerable here
Okay.
and make a confession. I do more than occasionally look at TikTok. Okay. I get a lot of inspiration from a lot of great speakers on there,
Mhm.
and I cannot remember his name right now. I'm going to have to get it later on, but he was talking about um, when you tell somebody to not do something, that already makes whatever you're trying to accomplish a negative. It's
Agreed.
like, don't, I'm trying to think of the example he used with kids. If you tell a child to not do something, they're automatically going to focus on whatever the wrong behavior is.
Right. Right.
Um, uh, Here's an example. Don't read your texts. Don't bring your phone to the table.
Mhm.
Okay, that's the negative. The
Right.
positive is, let's have a conversation around the table.
Mhm.
That's what you really want, because you
Right.
know that the phone
Right.
is going to cause people to not pay attention.
Right.
So you're focusing on the positive kind of thing.
Mhm.
When you're closed-minded, you've bounded and said you can't, you aren't,
Right.
whatever.
Right.
You're not open to. And this were the Pharisees. It's like they had religion down to a science,
Yeah. Yeah.
and all of the duties um, of the belief system they
Mhm.
had locked in,
Right.
but they have alienated everybody else.
Yep.
They've alienated the followers of God because they can't live up to the Pharisaic standard and all of the additional things that they've added on to
Right.
the law that God had laid out.
Right.
And they've alienated people outside of the Judeo belief system that, well, we could, that God can't love us.
Right.
And that Jesus was trying to shatter that and say, you guys got it all wrong.
Yeah.
This is about being open to what God can do and wants to do.
Yeah. There, I when I took some notes on this, the shift that we see in God's interaction with us, they go, God's the same forever, da da da, and I go, I'll bite on part of that, okay, but then we don't recognize those changes that we see in Scripture, and it bothers people sometimes when you use the word change. It tends to give challenge to people. But so let's use this as an example. So first of all, the children of Israel are guinea pigs. Let's get that out. If we were the guinea pigs, we use the term, and Mackie does this, and I've said this before, that personally, that he'll keep saying their failure, their failure, their failure. And I want that term from me, and I keep doing it, say our failure. Because I
like
say
that. That's good.
Often, we are them, they are us. I'm looking in a mirror. I'm not looking at somebody else. I'm looking at myself in that same scenario under that guinea pig first time deal. So the first time God has an interaction with them, it is very overt, very grand. Okay, the plagues, sea of reeds, pillar of fire, pillar of smoke, Mount Sinai. These are all very overt, big, grand. Okay. Then he gets a little more personal, but it's still at a communal level. At a communal level, where we get into water, manna. Those are miracles. They're communal, but now we're getting to that relational setup. We're getting there. There's the miracle of keeping their sandals and clothes from not wearing out. Now that's an interesting twist because you don't notice it in the moment. You're not looking at your shoes and sandals going, man, these aren't wearing out right now. You're not thinking that. That's one of those hindsight miracles.
Retrospective, exactly.
Right. And how many of those do we miss? Oh my gosh. How many do we not even take the time to look back and go, what have I missed? So we have that. Now we get to Jesus. So we get to Yeshua, and the very first miracle we have recorded, and I say recorded only because in this thought process is how would Mary have even thought to ask Jesus the question? Mom,
she knows it's possible. He probably did something at home.
Who knows? Something.
I'm out of oil for making the bread. Oh,
to prompt her. That's right. To prompt her to do this. Right. So that next one is still communal. I'm going to follow me on this. It's still communal. So, but on a much more intimate scale. So we've shrunk it down. We have a communal. This is not for specific. It's for a group. But now we're more intimate. We're getting there, okay? And he has this. Then from that point on, things become direct. They become personal. They're directly touching individuals at the individual level. That's the change that we see through this. So he is shifting something that's when he starts talking, and the discussion becomes much, much more your life.
Yeah.
Okay. There is a communal aspect to it all still, and they understand that communal need. But he keeps reminding them that it's at an individual level that you're held accountable. That part of that deal before was because when you look back at Scripture and they say, "In the children of Israel," and they get, so we ban them all, and you go, you don't think there's somebody that said, "Go with the spies." Go. I say yes. I'm with Joshua and Caleb. My hands up. I'm with Joshua and Caleb. And Instead, that whole generation goes away, and you're like, but I wanted to go with them. But you were with the group, right? And Jesus, there's a slightly different tack taken here, which is interesting, and still more to flesh out on that. But unless you're, like we talked about, unless you're open-minded to what you're thinking about, you're going to miss this shift.
Right.
And I think this was part of what the Pharisaical leadership at the time wasn't grasping. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was listening to John Eldridge this morning, and he was talking about, he recently wrote a book called Resilient, and it's really good. But he was talking about that same kind of transition. You were talking about more of the, overt things that God was doing, at the outset, coming out of Egypt and becoming more relational. Then there was also this shift of God proximity, tabernacle, temple. He's there, and we know he's just on the other side of this cloth, kind of thing. And he's there, to the transition that Jesus says is now we're the temple, and he's now in us. And that for them was a tectonic shift.
Huge.
But it didn't. I was reading another book called Atomic Habits, and he was talking about incremental changes, and he's talking about literally tectonic plates. There's constant pressure that's building, and then all of a sudden, at this one moment, boom! Everybody feels it,
right.
But it had been building for a long time prior to that,
right?
And that's what Jesus happened to be at that tectonic shift period, but a lot of what God was teaching up until that point was bringing them to that place.
Right.
They just weren't aware of it and weren't looking to see that happen. Well, and that's where that open-mindedness needs to take place.
Yeah, there's this. There's still this core. The second temple is still there. We have an event with the rending of the veil, right? And people want to throw all kinds of stuff into that. And I think we like to create things sometimes that aren't there, and people go, what's wrong with that? And I go, you have to be careful, because if you take that too far, you can take any verse you feel like out of scripture and make it say anything you want, and it sounds good. And I go, it's a very slippery slope. So, but we'll use the rending of the veil. And then eventually when Jesus is talking about the temple, and he said, that's not going to be there. Eventually it's not. Right. And in this shift, what you just mentioned, he said, okay, so now you're going to be accountable for this. In other words, this part and that connection to everybody else is going to come through you, because there's no temple there now to go to. Okay, so step one, the veil gets split and everybody gets a peek inside to realize there's nothing there. The ark had disappeared a while back. So, but the leadership were still going through the perfunctory duties without that there. And we'll debate whether they think God's there or not. That's another debate. But so it's not there. And then to make sure that develops into its point, then it eventually gets wiped out totally and says, okay, now you know that that's not. And so what I've said before is more impactful, meaning because I've talked about you being this, and you go, but the temple's still there. And we're talking this happens in their generation, maybe the generation after, kind of thing. And then it's gone.
Yeah.
It's interesting that in the letters that we get with Paul, we never get a story in there about the temple being destroyed. It's an interesting thought to me. There isn't any. It's interesting. Think about it, because you know that the Jerusalem Council is based out of Jerusalem. So we're talking about that issue, and that included that occupation. I think that was part of of what the rebellion of the zealots at the time caused
Mhm.
that action to go back.
Right.
So that right wing zealot force that was
Mhm.
pushing against Rome because they still wanted Rome out. But
Yeah.
Jesus even said that's not going to happen in this time or at that time. Eventually that will happen. Said, but that's not the time there. And so them deciding to take God's action into their own hands, they go. They don't have the blessing of God, like we see the children of Israel. I mentioned this in my notes from before too, is that the children of Israel, God says, I'm with you. I'll protect you. I'll go into the land. Because he could have sent plagues in to kill them.
Mhm.
He could have sent the angel of death to go kill them, and they just could have walked in, literally just walked right in. But he doesn't. He says, I'll be with you as long as you're with me. It goes this way. And we have a couple of battles where they're not aligned with God,
Mhm.
and it does not go well. it really
Yeah.
doesn't go well. So we have this balance of doing this, and they're zealot, and they pushed. It didn't go so well, and then everything gets wiped, right? And so it makes that thought process that you just mentioned. Now it draws it. Now you go, oh, even if I was struggling with the fact the temple was still there, and said, you're a temple, but there's a temple, da da da. Temple to us is a picture,
Mhm.
maybe a model. We made tabernacles in Sunday school. That they're just little things. They have no depth to us, which is sad because our lineage, if we understood it, we should. That was an amazing time, and would it
Yeah.
have been to be there with that? And we don't feel that connection, and that's sad. But at the same time, how do we struggle with what the expectation is now? Because then we have those grandiose things and those kind of amazing things, and then you say you're it, and then you go, yeah, but, and then you go, well, and we were talking about now we have now you're carrying God's banner,
Right.
and then do we bring shame to God? Does the banner that we carry, whatever we put on our shirt, whatever we put on our hat, whatever we do, are we
Mhm.
bringing dishonor to God? Because when we wear that banner and do that stuff and then do what we do, we have our point. Again, now we're back to the open mind, closed mind game. Yeah.
Well, and I love what you said earlier that don't look at it as us and them, but as we.
Yeah.
And when you see what happened then and the difficulty of the Jewish people to wrap their heads around the fact that God was no longer contained in this building,
Yeah.
which was interesting because the Pharisees then had some sense of control over God because for you to get to God, you got to go through us.
Got to go through me. Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
So God shatters that. They were literally, literally it's Wizard of Oz,
Yeah.
the curtain came down and,
Yeah.
and there ain't nothing back there.
Pay no attention to the
And
man
it's like,
behind the curtain. That's right. There is
whoa,
nothing
exactly.
there. Yeah.
So then God does it again at the, I wouldn't put it at the same significance level, but illustration wise, the Reformation, and again, a separation of the fact that the Catholic Church held control over what religion was.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
What Martin Luther was trying to do to remind us that the priesthood is within us.
Right.
Fast forward to us. Here we have church is in this building that we do on a regular basis, and a pandemic shatters that and says, you can't gather anymore. So are you no longer a church? No, the church is the body of Christ. It's the people, how we do life, community, whatever.
Right.
We might have to redefine based on what's going on here, but it doesn't change who we are.
Yeah.
And it doesn't change who
huge.
God is.
Yeah. And that's huge.
That's that open-mindedness thing of we have to stop putting God in a box and saying, this is how he functions. This is how he operates. These are the parameters that he works within, and realize God is so much bigger than that.
Yeah. I'm going to tread some very scary ground. So let's do that now to my messianic believer. So be very careful. I'm not there to insult anybody. I'm not there to do this. Just walk this mental picture with me, because a lot have seen this, regardless whether they're going to admit it or not. Dr. Seuss, and we get The Grinch Who Stole Christmas. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
this is really going to. The people are already, their hackles already up on their back of the neck. I can tell. And there's a point where the Grinch takes everything that he thinks is that away.
Mm.
Okay, he
Yep.
takes everything,
Right.
and the group goes out of their homes
Mm-hmm.
and just make a circle. There's nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
And then they sing together, because that is it's the communal element. Like you said, it's the people. It's not the tree. It's not the food. It's not the decorations. It's not the gifts. It's the people.
Yeah.
Okay. And in that people moment, that's where you get it. And that's what Paul kept dealing with, and Peter kept dealing with, is you guys are looking for ways to isolate.
Right.
And Paul kept going, we got to find ways to mend. Yeah.
And I liked what Mackie said when he was talking to that woman. And he said, she said, this has been her experience. And he said, that's not my experience. And realized that what's going to open the door for open-mindedness and transformation is for me to share my story.
Yeah.
Not for me to pound down truth.
Mm-hmm.
Because my story is my truth. And it's the transformation of what I've experienced as a part of a follower of Jesus.
Right.
And that to me is going to be the biggest opportunity that we have with people.
Yeah.
Yes. Are there people who have received Christ because somebody was standing on a corner saying if you don't believe God, you're going to go to hell? I actually have met people who that was their introduction, and genuine believers.
Right.
Probably not the most, percentage wise, probably a very small percentage.
Right.
And that's why I've kind of stopped. I started getting a little closed-mindedness, stepping back from vocational ministry, when I was paid as a pastor. When I started, I started getting very critical of churches, particularly mega churches and whatnot. And I realized, you know what? God can work in a mega church. God can work in a house church. God can work in everything in between. God does work in all of those. And we have to stop trying to say this is the only way God does it.
Right.
And start saying, okay, God, what are the ways that you want to do it?
Right.
And step into that stream.
And that's a good point. So you're in Jesus's time, right? And the people that are there, I've mentioned this on the podcast before. We're talking about in a lot of the healings that happened. Okay. Some of them had nothing, actually, very few had anything to do with sin at all. So we're not about wrongdoing here. What we get is the people are disconnected. They are removed from community. That communal aspect is taken away from them. They cannot go to the temple and do their sacrifices like they want to do. Okay.
Right.
So that element of community, that element of connectedness is gone. And some of them have never did it. You had people that they spent their whole lives that way, and so they've never had that opportunity. There were others that did and then didn't. And the ability to go back and interact at that communal level. The lepers, it's not even just going to the temple sacrifice. We're talking about people.
Right.
Period. Okay. In that connection level stuff, we're seeing another shift, another change in that, where he's bringing you back, because the rest of the people, we're talking about just these isolated people. The rest of the people it's not like we have a godless society. We don't. Matter of fact, like I said, the rabbis around and teaching, it's not a godless society at all. It's very much a God society. It's that the challenges had said that the Pharisee had painted a box, you need to play in this sandbox, and Jesus is going, when you're walking along, Torah has it. What's engaging in the particular point where he decks with the Pharisees here, when his followers are walking along and there's gleaning the sides of the fields, like you're supposed to do. It tells you for the wanderer, for the sojourner, for the poor, the widow, the orphan, that you could strip it off, and then so they're eating. They're that husk, and I've done that before, where you take raw wheat. Ooh, I love that flavor. I love that flavor. I feel sorry for people that are black wheat intolerant. I feel sorry. I love you guys, but I feel so sorry for you because you're missing that part of community. Anyways, okay, so we're walking through this.
You can do that with cauliflower. It's possible.
That's true. You can glean cauliflower from the fields and rub it and break it up. There you go. Okay. Rawr, 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 rawr. So, but they glean this and then they get them for not washing their hands.
Right.
And you tell yourself, how many people stopped doing that and didn't take, like I said, Torah's good. And then somebody told you if you do this, now you're making something good not. And you go, oh my gosh. And he's going, and then he says, only that he says, I'm not even going to address. I mean, he turns to them about honoring their mother and their father. In words, you're so bad that you're not even getting that one of the top 10 you're having a problem with. And this is about something where I've created a provision for people to do all of this. So they're being able to engage. And these people, that leper couldn't even engage in that. You know, something as routine and as simple as this. So he starts down this road of going, which just shatters this box. It shatters the stuff. And it's funny when you're a little kid and you're caught in a lie and you will dig your heels in, chocolate all over your face. It's on your hands. You can, when you're pointing at mom, you can see the chocolate on your hands, but you didn't eat it.
I didn't do it.
And you will dig, and you look at a kid and you almost are laughing at him because you dig yourselves in so hard on the lie that you really almost have yourself convinced, you know, and you go, well, you're missing the point, you know, and up to a point where it costs the leadership everything. Because when Yeshua comes back, I think that's a point where that leadership gets shattered for the believers, and as that the ripple effect that struggles out from there until we get to down at Alexandria and Constantinople, and that's 100 years later when we get to that split. That brings us to the Martin Luther issue, where then we have to correct the Constantinople split, which was already bad enough. Then we get it to there, and then we get this and access and personal, and and that open closed, and I hope we're in one of these phases again. I really truly do, and I think we're seeing it in church. The pandemic and people that had the issues with it, and they kept throwing some. They kept trying to blame somebody else or somebody else for it. And I went, you know, like you were just saying, the church questions how it says this is how they're not allowing us to have church, and I'm going,
no, they're not.
You're kidding me. You're. Yeah,
I know.
And you go,
I know.
and which gets in the structure, which brings the challenge of, I'm agreeing with you that God can work in mega churches and work in home church, that kind of stuff. What we get is we're the ones that end up messing up how we do that. And it's that, again, we think we're open-minded, right? This is the point, is that, of course, I understand it. And anybody that is welcome to come to Jesus, you know, and that and then you realize that you're the P word. You're that Pharisee. You have become what you so at times are so staunchly against. And you realize when you look in the mirror, you go, oh my gosh, I'm, and it brings a tear to your eye, because you just go, I can't believe that we are them, they are us, and the people that are in deal, but we would never say that about the Pharisees. Oh no, I would never be that. And I go, mirror.
Well, and you start going, okay, so who are the Pharisees of today? You know, the legalistic churches that say it can only be done this way. Yeah. Who are the Samaritans of today?
Oh,
Who are the
oh,
people who believe in God, but not the way we do?
yeah.
You know,
Oh, oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
you know,
Oh, yeah.
I have to be careful.
Yeah, and us to be told, and we're told, don't listen to them, don't do that
Right.
because they don't believe the
Hmm.
way we do. Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, totally. Totally, totally,
You
totally.
know,
And we get in that.
it, we have to put ourselves in those shoes
Yeah.
and look at, and that's what I love about Mackie is he brings out, he helps us understand the culture of the day and the context to say, okay, so if that's what they were dealing with, what are the things we're dealing with here
Yeah.
that are similar? And we find ourselves, that's when it ends up slapping us back in the face and saying, oh my
Yeah.
gosh,
Yeah.
that's me.
Yeah.
That's me. Thank
Yeah.
you, Lord, that you're helping me to see, you know, honestly, I would say from my theological background and my theological education, I was a Pharisee to some degree in terms of what I thought was absolute. You have to do it this way.
Right.
Um, had an encounter of God showing me my humanity. I would say I'm probably more like a Nicodemus that's saying, okay, God, I have all this rich training now. What can I do with this differently?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And that's what I hope others will have as well.
Yeah. I that's a story that I would love to have seen played out.
Mm.
Nicodemus. I
Hmm.
don't believe was the only
Hmm.
one. I believe he was a narrow
Hmm.
representation of a narrow group that,
Right.
and the lives that that have been, in other words, we're looking back, right? So have
Hmm.
been affected by Nicodemus going forward.
Right.
And that, if you could do ancestry.com,
Hmm.
just if you could, and you could go,
Yeah.
okay, so arguably for us Gentiles, right?
Hmm.
Arguably for us, our Sinai moment
Hmm.
is Jesus. So
Right.
I'll bite on this. I'll
Hmm.
bite because we need to remember that lineage and Jesus. We were talking about this, that they have to circle that Bible Project makes the point that
Hmm.
everything points to Jesus, and I
Right.
agree. I said,
Hmm.
but I said, don't forget, you're pointing to Jesus, and Jesus is pointing to the Father.
Right.
There's never a point where he says, "Look at me," ever, ever, ever,
Hmm.
ever, ever. And he said, don't forget, blah blah blah. Everybody's pointing to Jesus. So coming that full
Hmm.
circle, our Sinai moment, I'll argue
Hmm.
is that I'll bite.
Hmm.
But you can't have, if he doesn't, if he doesn't his authority,
Hmm.
he's claiming the authority
Hmm.
that is from Sinai. Actually, he's claiming authority
Right.
from creation, but we'll argue
Right.
from
Exactly.
Sinai. Okay, so he's claiming the authority from Sinai because even the prophets call him a prophet likened unto Moses. So we're
Hmm.
bringing you back to the Sinai moment. So I'll bite that's our Sinai and our lineage. We need to not stop there, go back to
Right.
his beginning, which takes us back to the garden, anyways.
Hmm.
But that we need to understand that lineage and then take that and roll forward in that and how he viewed that
Hmm.
the shift that we're seeing
Right.
in that, and then how do we share that, but not degrade the lineage, sadly enough, of where it's built on. And church, we were talking about this with B'nai Yosef in their 40 days of repentance, are
Hmm.
repenting to brother Judah for the
Right.
atrocities that we've done to them. Where
Hmm.
we say, we were talking about this offline. I said that
Hmm.
we want to, don't forget the Holocaust, and I'm, trust me, that's not said snippetly. People don't take me
Hmm.
out of context here. I totally agree. I said, but we're not willing to acknowledge our own fault in the Crusades
Hmm.
and the pogroms, right? The purges, the Spanish Inquisition, okay? And our part in that as church, right? That rift side that shredded that. And we can
Hmm.
go and say, how that I'm not there to judge Judah, but to honor our brothers and sisters for that. And then to be so bold as to say, well, my new and your, I said, no, 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 be very careful. Is that don't dismiss that. If you go and take that from a standard church standpoint, you're going to believe something you were told that I think is going to shake you up a little bit when you realize it wasn't. Yeah.
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 Yeah. And okay, I might tread on some feet a little bit here again too. So bear with me. This is an illustration.
Yeah.
Bringing it to us today, Holocaust was for most of us not in our lifetime.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
My parents in their lifetime, me no. And what that was, and even what the Crusades were, it was politicizing religion. It was politicizing
in the name of God.
exactly.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
In the name of God.
Right.
Whatever pharisaical, pick the pharisaical call. Right. In defense, and it's apologetics on steroids.
Yeah.
Actually, it's apologetics
on
yeah.
Apologetics with cyanide.
With cyanide. Yeah.
Anyway,
no joke.
Just recently was rewatching the TV series Newsroom, which was one I've always enjoyed for a lot of different reasons. But in there, they were talking about the Tea Party, you know, the right wing faction of the Republican Party, politicizing religion, and using it as a weapon.
Yeah,
and I think that's the kind of thing that I go, we have to be careful.
That and we're bringing discredit to God, and we're so focused on other people and maybe a behavior that they have that we're not happy with. And again, still need to be careful what we're treading on, but the fact that behavior we're not happy with, and then you go, who's bringing discredit to God? What you're saying is, I don't like what you're doing, but this is defaming God. And if you go back and look in Scripture, you'll find out how God deals with people that defame Him, and it's not good. And if you think you get away with it now, there will be a time. If you think you're going to escape, any of us are going to escape judgment, I think you need to not drink that Kool-Aid. You need to be careful about that. What you're going to have is how does God look at you and your heart within that, and then it's still going to be His call, and it always will be in that deal. So, any other thoughts you want to land this plane on, as in the famous words of Tim Mackie? Thank you.
Yeah. I think it comes back to, and I was having this discussion earlier today, of we cannot talk about Scripture apart from its impact on us and how it's going to affect me today, right now.
I like that.
And that is that sense of, okay, God, I'm open to the fact that I don't know all truth, that I don't know what you want in whatever. So I've got to come to Scripture and say, what is it going to teach me that I don't know that will change the way I live? And I think that's walking away from this. As I listen to Mackie, it's like, okay, I want to live differently in such a way that I am open to what are people saying, and honestly hearing them. And will that change the way that I perceive them and the way that I relate to them? And hopefully make it a more of a relationship as opposed to just a connection or whatever.
Amen. That perfect. That's exactly it. May our hearts and having an open-minded thought process sound very Greek, but as we start to embrace that relational part of open-mindedness, because closed-mindedness isn't relational. It's like you said, it's a bounded faith rather than it's
propositional. It's not relational.
Yeah, no. And so I think if we can embrace that and live in that with the grace to ourselves, we're trying to figure this out. that we're going to make mistakes in those points, and we're going to try to figure out how we, and then the willingness to mend the broken relationships as we muddle through this, is something that's important.
Yeah.
So, thanks for being with us tonight. Oh, wait a minute. Let's do a point to ponder. Ponder this just at the end. Nice little clip at the end. Toby Mac again. Not once did God say, worry about it. Speak life. Thanks, Toby Mac. And thanks for with us tonight. Thanks for hanging with Jimmy on the Dusty Feet.